welcome to See the Stories, the signature segment of the 3-hour news show.
So these days, we've been hearing lots of news locally in Indonesia. What do we have, Ranga?
We have, well, this one is pretty cool. No, maybe not, but we'll find out. A celebrity in Indonesia recently decided to reunite with her partner after suffering with had been an abusive relationship. As it turns out, many people out there have the same experience.
Now, many victims would return to abusive relationships. Now, this is because they're driven by the basic necessities of life, such as financial security, shelter, and many other reasons.
Many women actually live on their own for a period of time as their injuries heal and only miss the routine of family life despite all the abuse. They may think that violence is the only face of the relationship.
So we've seen this kind of cases in also not only in Indonesia but also internationally. We heard about how Rihanna went back to Chris Brown after that, you know,
That
abusive, that fiasco. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can't understand, but I guess there's got to be some good reasons.
Man, I was really furious because I refunded my ticket for a concert in Jakarta.
That's a good reason to be
That's a
mad.
good one.
All right. So why do domestic violence victims often choose to return to their abusive partners?
As what Ranga and I just said, we couldn't understand because, you know, logically, you won't go back to things that hurt you. Now let's find out the answers from clinical psychologist from personal growth, Maria Alyssia. Good afternoon, Alyssia.
Good evening, actually.
Oh, good evening, probably. Oh, yeah. You know, I lost the track of time. Alyssia, thank you so much for being with us. Now, we've been talking about this particular matter, and also in the social media, we've seen lots of people actually commenting about the recent tragedy, not really tragedy, incident from this one particular celebrity couple in Indonesia. But why do victims return to their abusive partner? Would there be a psychological reason or explanation behind this decision?
I think it's important to understand that leaving a partner who abuses you isn't as simple as just walking away. Because domestic violence occurs in intimate relationships. And ending any intimate relationship is difficult because, like it or not, that person was once a significant part of your life. Things get even more difficult in the context of domestic violence because it involves being stuck in a pattern where the perpetrator's main goal is to take control. So between the abuse and the isolation from your resources, there are also honeymoon periods where the perpetrator shows remorse and basically instill hope in their partner that they will change for the better. That's why people within abusive relationships can have these strong feelings of ambivalence about leaving. Ultimately, I think rather than defining leaving as a one-time action, it can be better to envision it as a process because it can take a certain amount of preparation and attempt before separating from an abusive partner for good.
Okay.
I see. Now, you know, if we're talking about abusive relationship, we've heard the term trauma bond often appears following viral news about certain celebrity couples. Can you please elaborate more about trauma bond, and is it what this couple is experiencing now?
Okay, so there's no consistent way of defining trauma bonds as of now. In fact, there's very few studies that have been done on this particular term. Generally, we can say that they're unhealthy attachments between a perpetrator of violence and their victim, especially in relation to that cyclical pattern of abuse. But rather than trauma bonds, which I think may be a fancy term as well, it's more accurate to say trauma responses as a whole. And everyone's experience of trauma is unique. It's a combination of our background, our upbringing, lived experiences, and a number of other factors. So in terms of the celebrity in question, I don't think it's my right to dictate what's happening or them, what
True,
the people,
true.
everyone who's involved in the case. And that's why I've been talking about, well, domestic violence in general as a, general concept.
And Alyssia, just wanted to touch a little bit more on trauma bond. How long does it take normally for someone or a couple to break free from that cycle?
Well, in terms of leaving a domestic, violence situation, we can say that there is an average of 7 attempts until someone leaves their abusive partner for good, according to the National Domestic Violence Hotline in the United States. But breaking a trauma bond, or a domestic violence situation also requires more in-depth work to manage the psychological effects of the abuse and manage any potential factors that causes someone to be vulnerable towards being a victim. And that type of work can only be done with mental health professionals such as clinical psychologists and psychiatrists.
Okay, so it's very interesting since you were mentioning one line about mental health. These days, we became more familiar with the terms of, mental health and also all those, back in the days, I might say, like very peculiar terms like gaslighting, toxic relationships, things like that, that we are familiar now through the social media. But upon this, the victims who suffer abuse often remain silent, not only over the violence, but also all those sort of things that I mentioned before, gaslighting and all. But why do victims refuse to report their cases?
I think to understand the gravity of the situation, we can start with just talking about how common domestic violence actually is. In fact, Komnas Perempuan, I think that's the National Commission for Violence in Indonesia, recorded a total of 500,444,000
Wait, 500,000
cases.
500,000.
Yes,
Wow.
between the years of 2004 to 2021. So that's an enormous amount of cases, and those are the ones that's just been reported. So we don't know what actually falls below the radar. So in that sense, there's a lot of factors that can make it seem impossible for victims to actually speak up. So number one is that very real concern about their safety, especially since there's a possibility of retaliation from the perpetrator. Studies from different countries found that about 40 to 70% of female homicides were actually done by their partners, often in the context of an abusive relationship. And these massive safety concerns multiply when there are children involved in the relationship. But besides that, I think you mentioned it earlier as well, that there's also concerns about the victim's ability to be independent, because domestic violence involves isolation. And so a victim can have limited support in areas such as their basic necessities, finances, or even their social network. There's also, I think, undoubtedly a need to build or improve existing victim-centered services and legal protections that can offer more safety for victims when they choose to report. And on top of that, I think the most important thing is that there's a stigma attached to not only domestic violence and the mental health issues that it could cause, but also stereotypical male or female roles in a family. For example, people might not look at female victims favorably if they take on a more independent, assertive role.
I see.
All these different stigmas can bring about feelings of shame and guilt that makes it all the more difficult for victims to actually voice out their abuse.
Wow, that's very saddening.
Yeah. So Hans mentioned mental health, and you mentioned mental health too. So how does domestic violence affect victims psychologically?
There's a range of mental health concerns that they can actually experience. This ranges anywhere between general feelings of confusion, hopelessness, anger, to cases of depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. So as a result of these mental health concerns, they can also have unhealthy coping mechanisms such as substance abuse or self-harm. And in cases where children are present in the family, children of domestic violence victims can also suffer from similar consequences, which impacts their performance in other areas of their life, such as their developmental milestones and school. And on top of that, there's a higher risk of child abuse within that same household. So domestic violence doesn't only affect the victims themselves, but also family members or children that are also involved in the situation.
Wow.
Yeah, Alyssia, interestingly that you also mentioned kids, children that are involved. Sometimes, of course, when these things happen, you just feel sad for the kids. So what do you have, maybe just suggestions or things like that you can actually tell the viewers here maybe to their kids?
For children who are involved in
Or maybe,
situations,
what can you say to the parents, when it comes to the kids?
Yes.
Okay. So I think for children that are in domestic violence situations, or the parents themselves who are victims of domestic violence,
Right.
I think the best thing you can do for them is to be present first. It's okay to voice out your concerns and talk to them about the cycle of abuse, right? You can remind them that they don't deserve to be abused. It doesn't matter what they've done. You can't make someone abuse you. But our main task is to listen. And instead of blaming them, we can acknowledge how much strength, it takes for them to talk about their abuse if they do. Just be that constant safe space without pressuring them to talk about everything or make an immediate decision about their relationship. And we can also support the parents, at least, by giving them resources so they can be empowered to create safety plans, establish more connections, and overall just decrease that vulnerability they and their children have, so they can readjust to life outside of the relationship if they decide to leave.
Well, Alyssia, we've been talking about this kind of matter for a while now, and only by this short of conversation, we saw how extensive the abusive relationship could actually affect people in the family, in their respective family. But I want to know, from your point of view as a clinical psychologist, I don't know if you ever handled any of them, but from the abusive partner, especially, what triggered them to be an abusive one? Because we've been talking about this whole thing from the victim's point of view and also from the children, but from the abusive party itself, themselves, what was actually the trigger?
So there's a lot of possibilities to why, perpetrators abuse. One reason for this is because it's a learned behavior. So this can come from unresolved trauma, from their own childhoods.
So a familiar
cultural
behavior,
beliefs.
yeah?
Yes. So they could be observers to domestic violence themselves. They could have cultural beliefs about, gender roles and power hierarchies. Or they may be exposed to violent content through the media or other mediums. And in relation to this, perpetrators are likely to have difficulty regulating their emotions and impulses. So they can use these acts of violence as an effort to regain the control. They're afraid to lose or to express their anger. But I do want to reiterate that understanding why a perpetrator abuses other people doesn't mean their behaviors are justified. It's just to paint the full picture.
I see.
Now, sometimes when someone says that they have an abusive partner, they actually still love them and refuse to leave them. They just don't want to leave. And they actually believe that they can change them, right?
Oh my
They
God. That kind of savior behavior.
Yes, they believe they can change their partner, and they actually believe their partner will change. Now, what advice can we give them if they decide to stay with their abusive partners?
I think just as, psychoeducation, I want to be very careful in saying this because, yes, perpetrators are capable of change, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. If we think about years of experiences it's taken to shape these abusive behaviors, we can imagine that it's going to take a long time to break them down and replace them with safer behaviors.
Yeah.
And beyond that, that capacity to change, they have to recognize that what they're doing is wrong, and they have to have that willingness to commit to all aspects of change. So as long as the perpetrator themselves don't take responsibility over their abuse, they don't understand that abuse is actually a choice, and they're not fully genuinely accepting the consequences that come out of their actions, it's going to be hard to change. But if they do decide to stay in the situation, because again, it's a process, they're having to deal with a lot of ambivalent feelings, because it's not just it's not just negative experiences that exist within the relationship. It's also positive experiences from their past. So in having to deal with all of this, I think my suggestions would be the same as when you're working with the children or when you're supporting the parents. Just be there for them, because when someone is that isolated and that trapped in a cycle, you want to make sure they always remember that no matter what happens, they can come to you and that they'll be safe. And people, professionals, for example, or other organizations that can support them to get back on their feet if ever they decide to leave, because victims are the most vulnerable when they decide to leave.
Yes.
So as long as they recognize that you're a safe place for them and you stay true to that, I think that's the best we can do.
True.
Alyssia, I guess this is to put everything all together. How are the victims can get advice to move forward from this episode and get better?
For the victims themselves, I think even through the internet, if we look up websites either internationally I'm not going to name like specific website, but even if you just type domestic violence help or how to get out of abusive relationships, you would get a lot of search results that would offer you directions and things like that. So that's at least a preliminary step that you can take even from inside your own homes. But ultimately, if you want to make that step to leave, actively change your situation, the safest thing to do may be to recruit the help of other people, such as, again, mental health professionals, our support systems, such as our family and friends, trusted people, and those who are experienced in handling this situation, so they can guide you, make sure that when you get out, you have a safe place to be, and you're able to move forward from there.
All right.
All right, clinical psychologist from Personal Growth, Maria Alyssia, thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for your insights.